Hello, I'm Michael Mayer from VocalWisdom.com, and in this video I want to talk about the role the mouth plays in singing. You may, depending on what your background is and what you've learned and who you've learned it from, talking about the role the mouth plays may seem like a kind of an odd thing to talk about because it's so obvious. And at the same time, for some other people, maybe you've heard things like the true mouth is the pharynx, or just the whole classical approach sort of de-emphasizes the mouth, or statements like that we don't want to pronounce in the mouth. I've made that statement, for instance. So I want to talk about what role the mouth does play in the act of singing and how it fits into the whole system so that things are functioning most optimally, most balanced. So first off, let's take the obvious. Obviously, the mouth is an integral part of the act of singing. And that's kind of the reason I want to start with that is because the other statements that kind of talk about the pharynx or not pronouncing in the mouth sort of come from a place where we kind of take for granted the natural behavior of the mouth. And so it can be, it can, I guess if you take those statements too literally, we can really lose the natural aspect of pronouncing and then the influence pronouncing has on the functioning of the voice. So the key thing to understand is that the mouth it's not the source of the sound, but it certainly is the location that we pronounce with. And so it's important to really grasp this, to understand that pronunciation is made up of two fundamental parts. The form, which is what defines the vowel sound that we're making, whether it's an ah, a, e, o, u, whatever the vowel is, we change the form, which is the mouth, the jaw, the tongue, the throat. All of these kind of make little minor changes depending on what the particular vowel sound is that we're saying. And then the vibration. So when we're actually doing it, we think about, and see, this is so critical, we think about what we want to say. If we're saying, like we're doing an exercise and we're saying an ah, it's so important to literally think ah and want to, desire to pronounce distinctly, clearly, accurately. Because if we don't have that desire, then one, the form's not going to take on an appropriate shape. Two, and maybe even more importantly, we're not going to get the mental stimulus from the nervous system to not only make the shape correct, but also to stimulate the vocal cord adjustment and the impulse to make the vibration start happening, which is really important because that is what triggers the breathing to give air pressure and energize the vibration so that we're actually vocalizing rather than just making a sound. Ah. And so what happens is that, well, obviously a lot of things can happen, but one, if our pronunciation is lazy or just kind of, a big thing I find in observing people is that some singers who have been really trained on relaxation as a kind of a basis tend to have a weak impulse. And it's good to not be tense, but at the same time, we need to allow the natural behavior to happen. So what is it? It's pronunciation. We're saying something, which in the case of singing, we're saying a vowel and a pitch, which then vowels and pitches group together into words and melodies. That's really what it all breaks down to and combines into. So it's important that we stay very clear because it all originates in the musical imagination, right? So in our thoughts. So even if we're doing, say, for instance, just a simple scale, that scale is in our head. It's in our mind. We conceptualize it first. But if we don't physicalize the conception, then we don't really realize what's in our thought. And if the thought isn't really crystal clear and we don't have a strong intention to realize what's in our thought, then we're not going to get that stimulus that makes the body function reflexively and spontaneously. And that is probably kind of what the bottom line is that good vocalization happens spontaneously, and when it's easy, it seems like it just happens on its own. We think and we see the mouth opens, but at the same time, all the rest of the airway opens. The throat's open, the lower throat is open, the larynx is dropped down. This all happens in an instant. Now, I've conditioned myself to do this. So in order to condition ourselves, we have to understand the concept, then we have to do it slowly and deliberately. When we prepare, breathing and stretching the larynx down, opening the mouth, feeling the inside of the mouth stretching so that it's vital rather than just soft. All of these things then influence not only themselves, but also influence the voice. So creating the conditions of the whole system is how we go about creating the condition of the vibration. And that's what it ultimately comes down to. So the whole point is, right, I keep preaching, we want to stretch. Basically, we want to stretch everything. We're stretching the torso so that the breathing functions reflexively and spontaneously. We're stretching the neck and the head so that all of these muscles are stretched out and not slack, because we want the vocal cords. Basically, the vocal cords are two folds of flesh tissue that are inside the airway, and they can open to allow us to breathe, but then they can close in order to kind of swallow or block the airway. But that's not how they vocalize. When we vocalize, what they do, at least when they work, well, is that they stretch across the airway. They don't close across the airway. That's why I don't really talk about. When I figured this out more clearly, when I figured that out, I basically stopped talking about closing the glottis. Now the glottis still basically takes a closed condition, but we don't close it. It's a different thing. We stretch the vocal bands across the airway, and a lot like when you stretch a rubber band. As you stretch it out, the two halves of it get closer together. And so that's kind of how I envision what's going on inside here, is that when we stretch, and now some people yawn, but see, that's stretching the pharynx. I want to stretch the larynx and the mouth. Or the pharynx is part of it too. So like everything is stretching. A yawn basically only stretches the pharynx. And then we get this, and the vocal folds are still loose, and we're distorting the form so it pronounces funny. But if we stretch the vocal folds, and we stretch the mouth and the throat with it, rather than this, we get this. And now I'm pronouncing, and it's much more clear, and it's very intense and vibrant. So that's the key thing that what I think we're really wanting to go for. And so basically when we stretch the vocal folds across the windpipe, then we're essentially sealing off the respiratory system so that the air that's inside the respiratory system is automatically under compression. And so any air that's going to escape is going to escape because the tissue vibrates, right? And so we want to just think of getting that vibration. Set it up, stop, and that's why it's important not to breathe too much, because the more you breathe, the harder it is to stay calm and keep the breath under the voice. So we don't want to take big breaths. Even just kind of breathing like you're having a conversation is a good place to start. And then when the vocal cords stretch, it seals off the airway. And now when we start vocalizing, the only air that escapes is the air that's escaping as part of the vibration. Then the vibration creates sound energy, which radiates through the open, empty space of the vocal tract. So that brings us back to the mouth. The mouth is part of the vocal tract, and then the pharynx is sort of feels more like the back of the mouth. So the whole mouth needs to open. This is how we explain a statement like mouth pronunciation as being a negative. Because if we only pronounce in the mouth, then we're not resonating through the whole vocal tract. We want to pronounce with the whole resonance of the vocal tract. So mouth resonance, mouth pronunciation would be kind of like a, e, o, u. I'm not using any of the, well, not any, but I'm not using a balanced amount of pharynx resonance. So it kind of sounds mouthy. That's what we want to avoid. The other thing that happens with this is my larynx is now higher, so it's not in a good vibration position, and it's also not getting the full length of the vocal tract as a resonator. So the way that I feel, what seems like the easiest way to accomplish all of the parts doing what they should be, for instance, the larynx being low without swallowing it like that, is to feel like the inside of the mouth is stretching. Because basically, a lot of people have heard about lifting the soft palate. Well, the soft palate is basically part of the roof of the mouth. Some people have heard about stretching these pillars of soft tissue on the sides of the throat. Well, these are part of the sides of the mouth, the back of the mouth, but they're part of the sides of the mouth. And then the larynx, the bottom of the throat going down, is essentially the bottom of the mouth. Again, if we think of the mouth extending all the way back to the back of the mouth where we feel the swallow, technically that's the pharynx, but functionally in our behavior, that's basically the back of the mouth. And what we're looking to do when it comes to resonance is have a balance between the front of the mouth and the back of the mouth. We can read about this recommendation in Vocal Wisdom in Lamperti's statements. It's really helpful. And when we hear various styles of singing, we can almost recognize the definition of the style based on the preponderance of front of the mouth resonance versus back of the mouth resonance. So musical theater, pop, these types of things, very much front of the mouth resonance primarily. Opera, classical singing, mostly back of the mouth resonance. When really neither one is correct because they're both exclusive. We really want to have a balance between the front of the mouth and the back of the mouth so that both are equal. Because the front of the mouth basically gives definition to what we're saying. The back of the mouth gives ease because the throat's open and not tight. It gives color and dimension to the tone. It's basically what makes it acoustic, where front of the mouth singing is not very acoustic, so that's why it's usually acceptable when you're using some sort of microphone amplification. Back of the mouth resonance is what's going to amplify. But if we get stuck in the back of the mouth, like a lot of times we hear classical singers yawning and they're only using the back of the mouth resonance. One, pronunciation is not very clear. That's why it's hard to understand classical singers, even when they're singing in English, because they're only working on the tone and they're not really pronouncing the words. So that's kind of the thing. And if it's trapped that way, a lot of time what happens is that the sound is reflecting back into the throat. And it actually is not that audible in the space of a theater or a concert hall. So actually, seems like we're making really big sounds when we have just back of the mouth throat resonance. But because it's not also front of the mouth, the acoustic energy of it doesn't really travel, and it's not as audible. So it seems big nearby, but out in a distance, it really doesn't sound that big. There was a singer that I happened to stumble across on YouTube a few weeks ago. I should have looked up his name. I didn't know I was going to tell the story, but he was an Italian baritone from the 70s and 80s. So actually relatively modern, but he had a very traditional, historical way of using his voice. And I saw in one of the comments for one of his live videos of a live performance, this person who sang with him in some performance somewhere. And what he said was that on the stage, this baritone's voice really sounded pretty small. But he said in the hall, out in the audience, it was huge. It was bigger than the other singers that he was singing with. And the reason was because of what I just described. When we're big close up, that sound doesn't travel. The reason he didn't sound big close up was because his voice was focused and it was concentrated. It probably sounded intense, but acoustically it didn't sound big. So that intensity and focus of the vibration and the resonance, the acoustic energy, that really is what travels into the environment. So as a classical singer who is an acoustic singer, it's so important to not get completely obsessed with big throat and that kind of, because that sound does not travel. Same thing as that probably doesn't travel very well either, especially when we start singing with intensity. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the throat, so that means the throat's closed. There's another really, really important thing that's probably very not obvious, and it's part of something that I'm always talking about, and I don't hear very many other people talk about this, is I mentioned earlier, the concept of thinking what you're saying, stimulating the nervous system, and getting the response. If the mouth is kind of relaxed, what I call turned off, because we're just singing with the pharynx, even when I think about even when I'm thinking about articulating to stimulate the larynx and the vibration, that's still much more dull than if I think of stretching the mouth, right? Starting with a smile, like I'm always saying, feeling that elasticity that the smile creates in the muscles around the mouth, and then inside the mouth, feeling all of that stretching open, so that you're creating elasticity on the inner skin as well as the outer skin. It stretches the larynx down. The soft palate is probably being stretched out too, but I don't really care about that. But it happens. But I never ever talk about it. I never tell people to stretch the soft palate. But when we stretch the whole mouth, the soft palate is soft tissue on the roof of the mouth. Same with the back there, the soft tissue that tends to kind of close off the pharynx. The smile starts this lateral stretch, and in a lot of ways, the lateral stretch is really what makes the voice work. Without the lateral stretch, smile, stretching the inside of the mouth laterally and then vertically. So this four-way stretch, side to side, up and down. Now the vocal cords are stretched out, and you can hear how the vibration ah, ah, is so much more intense. It's because when you stretch tissue, it has more stiffness. It's just like when you stretch the strings on the violin or guitar. Those strings, you turn the tuning knob and loosen the strings. At a certain point, they just stop vibrating. They gradually vibrate slower and slower and slower until the point that they won't vibrate anymore. It's the same thing with the vocal cords. That's why we can't sing high notes. If we have trouble with high notes, maybe your throat's closing, maybe there's not enough breath energy, but really what's the underlying reason is because the vibration is not adjusted in order to sing the high voice. So what gets us into the high voice, we can't sing high if we're still slack. And so in my voice, you know how it just basically folds over on itself. The throat is closing up. So either it gets folded over and trapped in the throat, or if I force it out, it goes into a yell and it's clamped shut. The reason the throat closes is because the vibration's not secure. But if we stretch things out, so that's really the goal of everything, getting the vibration secure. And it needs to always be related to saying something. And so if we think about saying what we're saying clearly, there. And so old traditions of vocal training were speak the words, speak the vowels, feel, right? So if we say speaking versus you gotta be realistic. If you pronounce like that, you really can't expect there to be a good result if you sing that way. We sing very much like how we speak. Now we may speak like this, and then when we sing, we might yawn stretch. We might do some deliberate things, but functionally under the surface, the voice is still doing the same thing. The voice, the larynx will function the way we habitually speak almost all the time. So if we habitually speak with unvocalized breath going through, kind of like this, see, I'm basing this on a whisper, but my voice is still vibrating, but it's not a pure vibration. So if I'm like this, no matter what I do deliberately, under the surface, there I even articulated, but the vibration was still loose. So we need to be able to speak clearly. You can hear how the vibrancy, here, I'm relaxing. Relaxing is fine to get to a starting point, but then you have to let the voice vibrate. And so that's what this is about, the mouth, the role the mouth plays. But see, the mouth cannot be separated from the voice, or else it's not natural. It's not going to function. So that's how it all links together. I'm talking about the voice, but really the mouth and the voice have to be together. It's like what I've talked about before about smiling. When we smile, it has an influence on the vocal cords being more, it gives us a brighter, more brilliant, vital result. And that's because the vocal cords get stretched. Same thing when we want to pronounce clearly, right? The mouth is where we feel the desire to pronounce, and that influences the vocal cords. Each time. Now, my larynx is stable. My larynx is doing the pronouncing, and my mouth is doing the forming. So again, pronunciation really has both the mouth and the larynx are doing the pronouncing, because pronunciation has two parts. They're a partnership between the mouth and the larynx. And what often happens is, like, we have diction coaches who really want us to move the mouth around to pronounce more clearly. Now, that's partial. I've always kind of advised against that, but it's partially true. the mouth needs to pronounce, but we need to partner the larynx with it. And so the reason I've always kind of advised against doing diction like that is because they're only using the mouth. They're not including the larynx as part of, as part of the act. So it's important that the larynx and the mouth are always partnered up. And so practicing this, like I said, speak. So whatever you're going to sing, right? Say you're practicing something. So whatever it is a phrase of a piece of music, it's an exercise, even just a simple exercise, a simple scale. So that's what I'm going to demonstrate on. A simple scale on ah. So speak first. Ah, with a really clear intention to what used to be advised, encouraged. Emphasize the character of the vowel, right? What does that mean? Emphasize the character of the vowel. Every vowel has a characteristic to it that defines it, right? So it's what makes us know that it's an A rather than an E. So whatever vowel we're saying, we want to emphasize the character of that vowel. So I'm doing ah. If I say ah, it's not really very clear. I'm not emphasizing the character of that vowel. That vowel is actually migrating to even if I open the throat, it's still We have to start from what's instinctive. Pronounce from the brain to the mouth and the larynx simultaneously. So think, what am I saying? I'm saying ah. See? And in order to say ah, I'm opening my mouth to really give clarity and distinction to what I'm saying. Ah, it has to start with a desire to actually have good quality. Ah, rather than ah. No matter what we're saying, no matter what we're singing, no matter where we are in the range, we need to be intending to say it clearly. And that's why I've always talked about when we sing, we need to be speaking at the same time. That's the idea. So speak, focus more on speaking regardless of where we are in pitch. So the singing comes out of the smooth, continuous speaking of the line. Ah, singing is better thought of as continuous speaking. And then when you go into the high voice, ah, I didn't speak that high note. My whole thing, my mechanism turned off. Maybe out of fear. Well, in this case, because I did it on purpose to demonstrate it. But if I were a singer that was working on that, and that was the result I got, is because that turned off. I was afraid of actually speaking that note when I got there, rather than ah. So maybe you heard when I got to the note, at first it started a little too open. That's because I was really trying to speak it, and then it turned into its proper adjustment. So I have no idea what pitch I was doing. So if I knew what pitch I was doing, I would know that I needed to allow that to turn right away, because that's the adjustment of the high voice. And so getting the voice to be elastic for the high voice is critical. See, if my mouth is relaxed, the vibration is too thick. It's still turning, but it's turning with a much more elastic, stretched out vibration. And so then that is going to it's going to be more clear. Now, your voice, my voice, not necessarily the same, but the basic functioning. So it should be the same. So how this will exist in your voice may not be exactly the same as it exists in my voice. But the intention, right? The coordination will most likely be at least pretty much the same. And so, like, for instance, if I go to the high voice and I don't have this balance between front and back resonance, one way to do it, that lost front resonance, which then also really affected the vibration. If I lose back resonance, then it just sounds like I'm kind of yelling. And obviously the throat's closing up. So front, back, and then vibration. These are the 3 points that need to stay secure. Okay, so that wasn't bad. You know, whatever comes out is what it comes out. Don't feel like it has to be perfect. Just figure it out and it will gradually keep getting better. All right? So I hope that makes some sense. Bottom line is, start with the idea of really actually pronouncing what you're singing. And that should feel very similar to pronouncing when you speak it. So that's why I always practice to speak the lines of the song, but speak them not just like how you're talking every day, whatever your normal speech habits, but speak them clearly with good pronunciation, emphasizing the clarity of the words, emphasizing the characters of every vowel, and get the mouth out of the way so that it's not just like a dull but have that little bit of smile stretch and feel the pronunciation on your lips, in your mouth, the roof of the mouth, in the vibration, the buzzing of the vocal cords. All of these things should be alive, okay? And that really, just doing that I would bet would make a big step forward for just about everybody. Okay, so I hope that helps. Let me know if you have questions in comments or emails, but comments are best. That way other people can learn too. Okay, I'll talk again soon. Thanks.